Hello, this is Storybooks channel. New videos are posted every day. Subscribe and click the bell.
Now, if she suddenly found herself alone in the city, she wouldn't know how to behave in a store or in an entertainment center. Lily felt all the time that her husband was watching her. Her movements were slowing down. They had no children. And Herbert already began to talk about the fact that it is necessary to go to the doctors and find out what is the cause. But one day, when he came home, he found Lily watching a soap opera with fascination. He couldn't escape her admiring gaze, and he decided that his wife had a crush on the actor playing the lead role. That day, Herbert was not in a particularly good mood. He had to deal with a lot of problems at work, including some not-so-pleasant ones, and he snapped. Lily had to call an ambulance. Herbert was very reluctant to let his wife go to the hospital, but the doctor cut her off. We have to monitor her and rule out internal bleeding. You want your wife to die in your arms? Before that, Lily had to lie to her heart's content that she accidentally slipped on the stairs and fell down unluckily like that. Of course, Herbert went with his wife to the hospital, but they couldn't give Lily a private room. It was all booked up, and the husband was kicked off the ward. We have visiting hours and you can come back then. The ward manager cut him off. And we'll talk to your wife about the nature of the injuries. So far, her explanation doesn't give me much confidence. Lily didn't start to feel better until a few days later. The whole time, she was a wreck. It was very painful to move. She was put on drips. Her arm was put in a cast. Did someone beat you up? Who? Asked an elderly nurse as she scrubbed the floors. Lily nodded and couldn't help herself. She cried. Husband frowningly clarified the orderly with a mop under the bed. Lily nodded again. So run away from him, silly, before it's too late, the orderly advised. He'll cripple you sooner or later or just kill you. Lily knew deep down that the attendant was right. However, there was an obstacle that could not be ignored. I have no money, she said. And without money, I won't get far. He would surely find me their heads. The poor orderly cut the conversation short. But a few hours later, she returned to the ward and handed the young woman a $100 bill. Take it if you're thinking of leaving him. Pay me back when you can. I work hard for my money too. I should be retired by now. But how can you live on that? So I scrubbed the floors from morning till night. Thank you, Lily whispered. I'll pay you back. She didn't have a penny yet. All plans for escape had been rather distracted dreams. Now she was determined, even though she could hardly stand on her feet after her husband's beatings. She decided not to escape at dawn. The hospital woke up early too, and her absence would be noticed in an hour or so. But if she got out of the building late at night, there was a chance that she would be gone until morning, and she would have a few hours head start. Lily put the essentials in a bag, ate everything that had been brought for dinner, though she didn't usually have an appetite for hospital porridge, and went to bed before bedtime. Unexpectedly, she dozed off. In general, the young woman felt relieved, as if the question that had long tormented her had finally been resolved. Lily awoke around midnight. She had managed to sneak out of the room unnoticed. The nurse who was on duty had gone somewhere else. Lily went down to the first floor and slipped out the side door reserved for service personnel. She knew she wasn't going to the train station. There were 2 train stations in the city, one for the railroad and one for intercity buses. But the first bus didn't leave until morning. She would have to buy a ticket with her passport. She'd be found out quickly. The railroad was even worse. There was only one train through town that went to Chicago via New York. It stopped in the evening. And that's when Lily would be intercepted by her husband. The only way out was to get to the highway and hitchhike the rest of the way. That's what she did. The first trucker put her in his truck and dropped her off the next day in a big city. Here it was easier to get lost like a needle in a haystack. One problem. Lily had given him the only bill she had. She had no idea how to ask for change in such a situation. So she found herself in a strange city alone and without money. It was impossible to go to the police. The whole story would come out. She would most likely be sent to her place of residence. Finding a job would take a few days at best. You can't just take the first job that comes along. She would have to look for a place to live, or at least a place where Lily would be paid a sum of money in advance, and she could rent a corner of the house. All the next day, the young woman wandered around the city and read the advertisements posted on bus stops and poles. Her situation was desperate. Here they offer a place for a caregiver, but she has no phone number. She can't call and make an appointment, and she has no money to pay for the call and machine. And there's no address on the ad. And another suggestion: dumpling pilots are required, and there's even an address. But it's on the other side of town. And how do you get there? No trivia. A shuttle bus. They also offered a shelter for homeless alcoholics and drug addicts. The ad guaranteed a night's lodging, food, a job with a daily paycheck. But Lily hesitated. She imagined what kind of contingent would be there. She still felt very ill. Her arm ached, and she was dizzy with fatigue and hunger. Lily found some change in her pocket and decided to go to the store to buy at least some bread. She was out of luck. There were no cheap loaves left on sale, only expensive slices in cellophane. Nearby on the display case were different kinds of nuts, and Lily couldn't resist. Her hand reached out, as if the young woman remembered her childhood in the orphanage and David, who from time to time stole chocolates from the store for her girlfriend. But Lily is grabbed by the arm. The guard, about 5 years older than her, was a tall guy. "Come with me," he commanded. "But me, I'll put everything back. I haven't eaten anything in the hall yet," fed Lily. Without saying a word, he led her into the back room and told her to take off her clothes. Why? She was scared. "How do I know what else you've got in your pockets or in your bra? You women have such a huge anatomy. Get undressed. Or shall I call the police?" Burning with shame, Lily began to take off her blouse. It was very uncomfortable for her. One arm was in a cast, but she managed to pull the bra strap off her shoulder, revealing a tattoo of a dragon with a rose. "Stop," suddenly the guard said, and Lily noticed the change in his voice. "Where'd you get that?" The last thing the young woman expected was for the guard to be interested in the tattoo. And this was stuffed a long time ago in the orphanage. She also said and regretted mentioning the orphanage. Now the guy will definitely think that she is a thief. After all, for the orphanage runs a bad name. Take the change. Good price for a couple of uneaten nuts. Lily almost cried. Saidi but at her the guard and hurriedly pulled out a phone. "Who are you calling?" Lily was frightened, but the guy didn't listen to her. "Mom," he said. When Mom was picked up on the other end, she seemed to have found herself. "I've regretted putting my daughter in the wrong hands my whole life. Now I can already summarize and realize that my story is unconventional. The first time I got married right after the institute, but it did not bring me happiness. We had no children, but I had a niece, Doria. My older sister moved to France on a program to work there as a nanny. She left her only daughter behind for now. She told me she'd pick her up later. She called me and told me the Americans were so smiling. You left your own child to nurse ours, and Doria grew up quietly in our home. And now I had no doubt that she would stay with us for good. It's hard to walk in heels, especially if you're not used to it. It's true that not all heels are suitable for the habit. I remember when I went on duty at a printing house in another neighborhood, in high stilettos, only to go to the theater in them. I went home barefoot. I don't care if it's the main street. I don't care if they take me for an idiot. But what bliss! And these boats are medieval instruments of torture come to life. Most of all, I wanted to unscrew the heel and throw them in the nearest garbage can. But on such high, but stable, as on my black shoes, you can walk a lot and a long time. Last year, walking was the only thing that saved me from despair. A feeling that has no right to be. What do you mean it doesn't have a right to be? Any feeling that isn't evil is worth living. And to trample for the first time, breaking through the routine of everyday life and love, figuratively speaking, to step on it is not a foot. The routine was still that. Husband came from work and lay down. The dominant position was horizontal. It didn't matter what to watch Village of Fools or How to Become a Millionaire. TV, good screen, big couch, soft comforts and snow. It does not matter to read a novel in the fantasy genre studied along and across or a primer forgotten on the table. Never mind sleeping or awake, but lying down, but not saying an extra word, not participating in the life of the family at all. So I've always thought of myself as a single woman, taking seriously for a friend this addition to the couch. The cushion didn't work, and there was still time for reflection, despite the external business. It's a waste. They say that physical work distracts from thoughts. Washing machine hums, hands rinse heavy snow under the blanket or peel potatoes, or wash floors on automatic. The head thinks and thinks. And in the end, neither from these endless affairs nor from the thoughts that do not leave neither day nor night. I want to sob and whimper, "God, I'm so tired," and then lie down and die quietly. All around, life was boiling in all its manifestations. It was spring outside with a bright, tender sun. Everything was beginning to grow. And while every blade of grass was perceived as a holiday, its later will start to understand. Radish weed aside radish pro-weed, and meanwhile nettles for happiness. Its first leaves fluffy emerald birds in their special spring voices so early in the morning, when almost darkness is a little paler than the real night. Daria is waiting for me at home. She has 3 silences of her own. Silence 1, only the rustle of pages can be heard behind the lessons. 9th grade is still without a tutor. We save money. We're saving money for university. Silence 2, in front of the mirror, only the clatter of heels when turning here and there. The other day on Saturday, I wore my most expensive shoes. Of course, she wasn't working. She was standing off to the side. And guys were distracted by it, because in such a form not to rake the garbage. And for disco, a mini skirt, net tights and shoes with rhinestones. Quiet. 3rd computer game. Her favorite game. A town populated by fictional characters. If at first she played by the rules like kids play dolls, build a house, leave it, supply it, populate it about the family, now Daria entertains herself by acting out whole shows. She has, for example, show hunger. She buys a luxury mansion for hers that has everything from a telescope to a swimming pool. Everything except the refrigerator. For a while, the little people enjoy life, splashing in the jacuzzi, singing from the bandstand, playing the piano. Then they start reaching out to their mistress and asking for food. She feeds them once a day, buys a plate of pies. Who had time, he ate. After a while, the pestilence begins. To sad music, death with a sight comes for one or the other. An urn with ashes is left in place of the deceased. Daria immediately sells the urn and the house becomes haunted. For the last survivor, Daria buys the most expensive refrigerator full of food. When I ask her if she feels sorry for the computer babies, she coldly shrugs her shoulders. What's there to feel sorry for? It takes 2 minutes to make new ones. I wish I had that kind of willpower. Daria will probably have a personality like my coworker. She's an animal trainer by trade. It seems that if her life was in the circus, she'd be able to handle lions without a problem. So far, her husband has achieved a rare degree of training. She wouldn't speak to him for 2 months at a time, sending him to his mom. Despite her pleas, her boss picked her up every morning and they drove to work together. Anyway, now Peter. After 10 years of marriage, she's pure silk. Not only does everything around the house, but sees Nancy as the one and only incomparable, of which you can't even put anyone else next to her. 2 things happened in my life at that time. I got into freediving and fell unrequitedly in love. Is an adventure enough for you? Asked my other friend Miranda. She couldn't have said anything different. By then I was in my 6th year of working for Incredible magazine. Every month it came to readers, 200 pages of photo text. Where would so much incredible stuff come from? We were sent materials from all over the world. Because the requirements for content we had were small, royalties were paid correctly. But many people want to tell about unusual phenomena occurring in their neighborhoods. Some have seen with their own eyes, the whole. Some saw mysterious mirages. We processed these materials and published them. And my friend Miranda did the publicity. A lot of the space in the magazine was devoted to advertisements. My friend was a terrible neighbor, didn't dare to get out, even if someone invited her to the villa. For her, there was only her own, very comfortable apartment and office. That's why she considered my life to be literally nomadic. After all, my husband, niece, nephew, and I often traveled around the country. And then there's diving. Many people like to swim underwater, but to come into almost related contact with the depth of the dive to the limit of meters for a man, having nothing but caresses on such a dare few. I'll tell you in a nutshell why I took up swimming. I started learning as a child, spending vacations at my grandparents' place. The Black Sea in those places is very beautiful. On my trouble, I discovered a mask and fins. Why bad luck? Because I held onto the water then. I could barely swim only a few meters. And flippers are a special thing. Even for a beginner, they give you faith in your own strength. It seems that you glide along the sea surface quickly, like a dolphin, and it is impossible to drown. I came running to the still deserted beach. In the early morning, the coarse pebbles were cold, and the sea was also still cold and clear as a tear. I quickly threw off my sundress and left it on the stones and threw myself into the arms of the sea, which picked me up and carried me. You lower your masked face into the water, and you are transported to another world. Paris. Below in a silly haze, underwater landscapes change. Huge rocks, overgrown with shells, green and red algae. The slanting rays of the sun, and white transparent umbrellas and silence. You hear only your own breathing through the tube. 200 meters from the shore, a rock was hiding under the water. You can sit down, have a rest. And from the shore, the sight is fantastic. A man sits in the middle of the sea as if he weighs nothing, or he could walk on the water like a saint. I ran my fingers through the thick, fluffy seaweed that covered the rock, and then my eyes slipped off my foot and I couldn't catch it. That's how I was left completely helpless quite far from the shore back I could not. After all, I couldn't hold on to the water very well, and the distance was long. I had to wait until there was someone I could call for help. In the meantime, the only thing I could hold on to was to keep the waves from washing me off the rock. And then I saw the girl, where she had swum from, and where she was going. A small black head flashed in the waves. The girl was paddling leisurely and with the confident movements of an experienced swimmer. "Help me, please," I shouted. It was embarrassing to ask, but it was even more frightening to be left without help. It's so easy to drown. I explained in a few words what had happened. The girl dived in silently. She didn't show her face for a long time. Then she surfaced and handed me my blue flipper with new speckles. "Now you can go back to shore," she said calmly, and she swam on. The same measured sweep of her arms, and soon her black head was no longer distinguishable in the waves. From that moment I realized, firstly, that I had to cope with any situation on my own. And secondly, I decided to learn to swim as well as this stranger. And I did. What's more, I began to dive to considerable depths without scuba diving. Free diving requires from a person long for several years of training and all the strength. Several times I surfaced from great depths, being on the verge of consciousness. Blue lips. The depth must be honored. The depth calls. I want to go into it and never come back. Every dive is a risk, the way athletes usually play with death. I had a period of depression after a few serious dives, claimed marks in competitions. I achieved then. The computer on my wrist showed it. But by some miracle, I pulled myself to the surface. I don't remember. And not at that depth. I was drawn downward, slipping and sliding further into that blue. Just a little bit more. And if it wasn't for my body, my mind would have stayed in the depths forever. And then I couldn't see water for a long time, not even in a glass. I thought it was the end of my normal life, but there was a man who took it upon himself to cure me. He was the head of the department in our town. His name was Ethan, and he saved me from the asylum. The doctor said, "Rest," and my first feeling was anger. What do you mean rest? Does resting make it go away? That feeling of helplessness and unwillingness to live. Blossoming depression in all its glory. But the doctor kept convincing me. "I know how to cure you. There's nothing you can do. My fight is lost." She's always been a big deal to me since the first dive. And now, even though I'm back, alive, she's still got the upper hand. She's gotten inside my mind. It's drowning me. I'll help you, believe me. At the hospital, he put me in a private room. The treatment consisted of injections, which he gave me twice a day. His hands were magic. He'd come in the morning and ask how you're doing. Talk about something. And then he'd drop the empty syringe in the tray. And I'm irresistible again. I want to sleep. I hug my pillow and sleep. I sleep. A respite from the nightmares that are becoming habitual. Before, in almost every dream, I saw that I overestimated their strength, lost the very point of return, and I cannot resurface. I, spreading my arms, as in a soft change, go into the depths, into the abyss. And here, for the first time, I began to sleep with a dead sleep, without heavy dreams. Ethan came in one day and I cried. He looked at my face and put the syringe away. And now, he said, we'll get better slowly. From that day on, I sat on the balcony in my bathrobe. 4th floor, who'll see? She doesn't even know how to do anything. And cried. Crying as much as you want? He said it was okay. Remember the old fairy tale about paradise? Only with tears came out of my eye a shard of the magic word mirror. I fell in love with this man, as we fall in love with our saviors, with those who delivered us from physical suffering. And my love was torn because it was unrequited. No, this man was not married, and I did not bring down anyone's family. But he valued his freedom above all else. He wanted to improve his career, travel, socialize with friends. On the other hand, I had a husband, and he didn't deserve for me to cheat on him. If Georgie had reciprocated my feeling, everything would have been solved. Simply, I would have honestly told my husband that I had fallen out of love with him, but no one promised me anything. And if I did decide to divorce, I'd be alone. I read somewhere that the true hell is loneliness, not fires, not devils, not frying pans. Loneliness. When I met Ethan, I thought I was done with loneliness forever. I'd made a friend. I didn't want to see, realize, and accept what was obviously different for Ethan. I was just a patient, shallow, unobtrusive patient who was simple and easy to relate to. Besides, he had healed me, and that too was a reason for him to treat me with warmth. But they were all wonderful and agonizing too. Those days in the hospital, we walked on paths strewn with pine needles. We sat on a bench by the pond. I'd tell something interesting from my life, thanks to the incredible. There was more than enough to go around. Ethan talked about the clinic, about his patients. There was something elusive missing from our conversations, something that would allow me to rest my head on his shoulder and close my eyes. When I got back on my feet, I went to see a psychologist. In our town, 2 husband and wife were considered the best in this field. I scored the reviews on the internet and realized that the husband is actually a wife hater. Clients sadly wrote that he opened their eyes and that it turns out in all the troubles in their lives they are to blame themselves. Why did they return to this psychologist? Again, it was a mystery to me. I went to see his wife, an attractive, well-groomed woman. About 40 years old, her name was Maria. Love brought me here, I said. I can only be happy for you. She smiled. Unrequited, I clarified. Love. In any case, a gift from God. And even if unrequited, it can bear fruit. Spiritual growth, wisdom, experience. Sit down, let's work. Maria. She told me to sit in the chair, cover my eyes, and relax. What has offended you the most? She asked, switching to you. I thought for a few moments. While Ethan was treating me, he was impeccably polite and attentive, but I was getting better. The treatment was over. It was time to get back to my life. He discharged me. I blew my nose like a little girl, and he said goodbye like a regular patient and didn't say he wanted to see me again. Didn't even ask for my phone number. I see. Maria began to speak slowly, clearly. She was suggestive. Now it's night for you. A night when everything from the tips of your toes to your scalp hurts, but it hurts the most to breathe. It's the dying hope of his love. If you have survived this most difficult time, you will begin to heal. Where does recovery begin? You will slowly begin to remember that there are other people in the world with their own wants and needs. Maybe you have a mom who has had a sick child lately who has missed you so much. Feeling sorry for them feels like shame that you thought so little of them. The first sign of recovery. You'll start to notice that there are some nice things in the world that aren't related to your loved one. A warm bath, a good book, fine perfume. Have you gained weight? Nature has given each of us an amazing amount of strength. But if you don't want to repeat the same old pain, if you don't want to be tormented anymore, let's think together what to do so that you don't fall into this trap again. What's the difference between happy love and destructive love? Crazy love is also called crazy love because it involves inequality. You are capable of loving and your partner is not. The more you give your soul to him to awaken reciprocal love, the less you get from him. I went to Maria for a few weeks. An affair with life is more than an affair with a man. She convinced me. It includes all kinds of love of family, of home, of animals, of one's business, of a beautiful city, of good weather, and of course of men too. If one thing is taken away from you, one thing remains, and the rest I collect love stories, Maria said. Not fictional stories, but real stories that happen to people. I remember an old story printed in a magazine. A man wrote about how lonely he was. He got a lot of letters. He chose a woman with 5 children. A year later, the magazine published pictures of them in a cramped apartment. They are drinking tea in the kitchen deep in the night when the children are finally asleep and they are happy. Or the story of 2 old people who met in a polyclinic, she in her 80s, he in his 80s. So what? That they found each other only now. Love brings joy regardless of age. And if you're shaking your head right now, you won't meet anyone like me. Think if you didn't know he existed. You'd live in the world and not grieve. Would look at men with wide open eyes and look for your destiny. So search, believe in yourself. It's not easy. It takes a lot of work to bring out the best in yourself, but only then will you feel that you live in complete harmony with yourself, that you're happy. I guess God heard Marina and sent me another version of happiness. I realized I was pregnant. For years, my husband and I had dreamed of having a child, but something prevented me from rejoicing with all my soul. I guess I had a premonition of the future. Time after time, the doctors didn't like the ultrasound results. And I realized that probably everything I had been through had taken its toll on the baby and my diving to greater depths, and the medications I was given at the sanitarium. In the end, when my daughter was born, I was told that she would not be a full human being. Everyone convinced me to give her up, from the midwife at the birth center to my husband. Have you found out you're not infertile yet? The doctors assured me, you'll take care of yourself. You will lead a healthy life and give birth to a normal child. Is this girl capable of destroying your family? Men can't stand living in a family where children are constantly sick with no hope of recovery. For a bitter minute, I agreed, signed a waiver to give up the baby. I was burning with guilt. I tried to find out something about my daughter at the orphanage where she'd gone, but they told me pretty quickly that the girl was adopted. She's hopelessly ill. I exclaimed. So some kind people found her. The headmistress shrugged her shoulders. They decided to make sure that the girl, the rest of her century, to live in good conditions. She didn't know my story and didn't want to get into it. My guilt was compounded even more. My sister finally obtained citizenship in Paris and took her daughter to live with her. Daria was leaving with enthusiasm. Young people love to travel. And fate brought Ethan and me together again. Ethan did not like holidays for the imposed obligation to have fun. He didn't like Christmas, especially not as a human being. This is not law-abiding Germany, where not only every visit is scheduled, but even every smile, gift, and candle burning. We have a hand here, a shoulder unfolded, and the fact that they invented these Christmas vacations in imitation of Europe, so it is a punishment in general. People simply consider it their duty to scroll through a month's family budget in the first 3 days. And what to do with the rest of the days? He doesn't know. And those who vacation in Courchevel are out of the question. They are few, and they have their own parallel world, which has nothing to do with the lives of ordinary citizens. And it's these ordinary citizens who become the patients of their department. This time they stayed with Jack and a recent medical school graduate. Of course, if Ethan had his way, he would have banned paid medical education. And to get it into the heads of some smart heads and lawmakers, he'd suggest that they and their relatives get their surgeries from the likes of Jack. But the sneaky part is that they would be treated by luminaries of learning. Jack attends surgeries and learns from senior colleagues. The process seems to start from scratch. He doesn't know the most basic things. And if anything, he'll honestly admit he hasn't been to any of these lectures. If Jack ever becomes a normal surgeon, Ethan can safely go to the theater as a potential ballet dancer. Jack flew into the resident with his eyes popping out of his orbits in horror. Ethan screamed he's in the emergency room with a man brought in and blood pouring out of his stomach. Massive bleeding. "Look, hurry up, I'm scared." Ethan ran to the emergency room. There, a citizen lay on a stretcher and quietly moaned, pressing his hand to his stomach. His plaid shirt was soaked with blood from massive bleeding. The casualty was perhaps a little too ruddy. Ethan lifted, tugged at its material, and saw that the citizen's stomach was mechanized. But the persistent odor of booze would have knocked anyone off their feet. Blood was pooling from a deep cut on his right arm and a narrow trickle dripped from his broken nose. The man opened one eye and, seeing Ethan, uttered, "Doctor, it was Alex who bottled me." The bastard hit me in the head, and then Jack stood next to him with his arms folded across his chest in prayer. Nurse Helen put a tourniquet on the man, and the sufferer was sent to the trauma center under his shirt. Was it too weak to look? Ethan Jack asked, walking down the corridor. But so much blood, so much blood. The future surgeon shook his head sadly. Started cheerfully, muttered Ethan, sinking down on the couch in the resident. "It's 9:55 on the clock. Good if there are no major surprises in major surgeries. Assistant Jack wouldn't wish on an enemy. I'm gonna have to pull some of my coworkers away from the holiday table. I hate to do that." Ethan opened the refrigerator in the far corner, lurking, donated by one of the grateful patients, a bottle of Armenian cognac, 7 years old. If there's no emergency, at 12 o'clock he and Jack will have a small drink. In the corridor, the patients sleep quietly. In the meantime, Ethan has Jack make sandwiches. We should at least get a little something to eat while things are quiet. Jack hustles obsequiously. Deftly he sliced a clear slice of ham and stacked them on slices of fresh loaf. 2 scoops of coffee for you, as always. He asked respectfully, opening the can in the cafe. Ethan nodded and thought that Jack might make a good bartender. No sooner had Ethan eaten the first bite of his sandwich than there was a knock at the door. The gray-haired head of Benjamin's patient from Ward 6 peeked through the crack. "Doctor, I need an enema." "It's just that on the second day nothing is working. It's so hard." "All right, I'll tell you." "Nurse," Ethan nodded and told Jack to find Helen, who disappeared. Probably gone to her friend Kate. "Urology. You won't. You'll be giving your grandmother an enema yourself," he threatened. "Jack, I don't know how to do that." He was scared standing in the doorway. "You'll learn." Ethan encouraged him. 10 days ago, Benjamin was brought to the ward in the most serious condition, 80-year-old old woman. As it turned out, she had eaten a guest and some lard, and she was twisted. So the poor woman could not breathe, could not charm. Ultrasound showed that her gallbladder was full of stones and needed emergency surgery. "Maybe we shouldn't, doctor," moaned Benjamin, whose cheeks were the same color as the hospital sheets. "I'm 80 years old and still dying. But not this one. You could have done it at home in your own bed without me." Ethan cut him off and told him to get the operating room ready. 3 days later, Benjamin was already shuffling down the hospital corridor and was taking a keen interest in life. During her rounds, she didn't miss an opportunity to ask Ethan if he knew anything about his marital status. "That cute old guy from the room that was operated on a week ago? I don't see anyone coming to see him," Benjamin sighed. "Perhaps he is a childless widower," Ethan suggested thoughtfully, and saw the old woman's eyes brighten. "Did I find it?" Jack exclaimed, as excitedly as if it were the latest scientific discovery. Helen and Kate were sitting at our place. They were already celebrating. Ethan asked angrily. "I don't know," Jack mused, but Helen had already taken Benjamin away. In the emergency room, an incredibly made-up girl in a scribe's coat was sitting in a 3 posterior position, complaining of a sharp pain in her right side. Said ER Dr. Andrew, "Most likely appendicitis." Ethan tells the maiden to lie down on the couch. With a slight movement of her shoulder, she threw her singers to the floor and found herself in the most unclothed clothes. Only a sequined bra and the same sparkling thong. What kind of masquerade? It's not a month. It's May. Ethan was surprised. Cigarettes. Behind the counter, the girl twisted right at work. The girl stood there. And what kind of work uniform do you have? Ethan asked innocently. It's not what you think, she said, embarrassed. I didn't think anything, Ethan said. I just assumed you were from the Walrus Society. We were invited to a corporate party to striptease, she explained. They promised to pay us well. When I was 100, I got a jolt of electricity. She put her hand on the bottom of her belly. The gynecologist was already looking. Andrew said hurriedly, in response to Ethan's questioning look, it's not their department. Jack stared at the guitar-shaped curve of the stripper's body. He seemed willing to study anatomy all he wanted at this point. Half an hour later, Ethan walked out of the operating room. Appendicitis isn't the most complicated surgery. Didn't need to disturb any of his colleagues. Jack was fine. At 11:45, Ethan looked into Ward 4, where the strippers had been taken after the operation. The girl opened her eyes, and when she saw Ethan, she suddenly cried. Who'd want me so ugly now? Ethan raised his eyebrows, but with his stomach positioned. The sickly woman explained. First of all, no one crucified anyone. Ethan suddenly took offense. I did a cosmetic one. It came out butt to butt. Slava Zaitsev would be jealous. In a week at least, we were left again. He was quiet and added, but I wouldn't advise it. Or he'll get a left side disorder, and we have no work to do, and they won't pay. I am now crushed, sighed the girl. Why have you sued them? For personal injury. Ethan winked and left the room. Room 5. He looked in because the lights were on and there were invited but clearly excited voices. And it was a good thing he looked in. On the bedside table in front of the patient Zhilieva, recently operated on for a stomach ulcer. Yes, there was a good bowl of homemade dumplings and an unopened bottle of vodka. What the hell is that? At the risk of Ethan flying into the room. Who brought it? My wife? Confused, Zhiliev. He ate the feast. Asked Ethan, pouring cold sweat and pointing at the dumplings. Already ate. Zhiliev didn't have time to spell, pushing the bowl away. Ethan handed the bowl to Jack, who flew at Jack's scream and told him to immediately send everything to the food waste tank. And I'll personally give this bowl to your wife tomorrow, Ethan said. And the vodka, too, he added, grabbing the bottle. I'll explain to her what your wife would have been if you tasted all that. And who? Zhiliev was surprised. A widow of vodka, broth, kefir. Ethan cut him off and headed for the resident's room. There he found Vasilenko enthusiastically devouring hot dumplings. The clock read 11:55. Bon appetit, Ethan barked. Yes, I just tasted it. Jack excused himself and reluctantly went to throw away the dumplings. He and Jack had barely had a shot of brandy before a frightened Helen flew into the resident. Ethan, there's Santa Claus being brought in, shouted she. I didn't order it. Ethan was confused, unless it was to make Jack happy. Insulting Ethan, Jack's egotistical response. Don't you get it? Helen got worried. He's in serious condition. See for yourself. Santa Claus was lying on a gurney in his red sweater and white beard. Red watercolor circles stood out sharply on her pale cheeks. Nearby, shaking violently, was a frightened elf in a white minicoat. A frightened elf in a white mini fur coat. She held in her hands a snow-white beard and his red and white hat. Since 6 o'clock, we've been going on calls, the elfess explained confusedly. Children are happy, and parents are always trying to give them treats. And he has such a temper that he can't refuse anyone. I told him a long time ago that enough is enough, so he doesn't listen. Who are you to him? Ethan inquired, examining the patient. The granddaughter is an elf. Ah, that's me in the script. That's my wife. They decided to make a little extra work. Examined long ago. Last asked Ethan last year. He had chronic pancreatitis and needed to diet, and he broke it. Violated is an understatement, Ethan said thoughtfully. Santa Claus gave him a shot and put it in IV. An elven girl sat next to him and held his hand. A white mini fur coat hung on the headboard of the bed, reminiscent of the angel wings that served. Ethan gestured to her in the hallway without her New Year's Eve attire in a short skirt and sweater. She resembled a student who had run away from a lecture. If his condition doesn't improve, we'll prepare for surgery, Ethan warned her quietly. He will live in the neighborhood in her eyes, she asked. Of course he will, Ethan reassured the girl. I've never seen Santa die of any kind of pancreatitis. From the resident, he called the head of the department just in case, and warned that a serious patient had been admitted. The chief promised to come if necessary. By morning, Santa Claus was feeling better, and Ethan told the elf that she could go home. Then he looked into the stripper's room and was surprised to find Jack there. He was carefully checking the poor girl's stitching, and without Ethan noticing, he was passionately telling her how many seriously ill patients he had saved from imminent death. Happy New Year, said Ethan and added Namakai, poking her in the side some more. Bae, what is Jack talking about? Happy New Year. Turning in for his shift, Ethan thought that this time he had had a pretty quiet New Year's Eve shift, and then they'd bring me in with the same trivial appendicitis. After looking at those who were to take over the shift, Ethan took over the operation himself. It means a lot to the patient. He's in a lot of pain, and with a stranger next to him at the time, it's doubly scary. You don't know what to expect from him. But with Ethan, I always knew that everything would be all right. I remembered those days in the hospital as a blissful vacation. The shots were good for the pain. My favorite doctor came to see me several times a day, and I didn't owe anyone any chores either at home or at work. I had time to think things over carefully. I realized that my husband and I could exist in parallel without interfering with each other, that loneliness would be my companion probably forever. My hopeless love began to slowly recede. The pain dulled. Or maybe, on the contrary, the feeling became another deeper feeling. I no longer wanted Ethan for myself. I didn't want him to be my most important thing. Now I knew he was there and he was doing well. I was discharged, and in the spring, I found out I was pregnant. At the ultrasound, this time we went together with my husband. The doctor turned out to be a man, thin, skinny. They say he used to work in a maternity hospital. At first, if he had to help move a woman in labor on a gurney, the midwives called him James. And then they were convinced he couldn't do that kind of work. That's what James said. They're sliding the probe. I think we're pretty flat on the belly. Here's one heart, here's another heart, another head. What's that? I really disliked such questions during the examination and noticed how pale my husband turned. You will have twins, dear, said the doctor. Not 100% sure, but almost certainly. A boy and a girl. Outside, my husband took me under his arm. See, he said excitedly, this is fate. Instead of that inferior girl we gave up, she sends us 2 children at once. In such cases, they say that God gives with both hands. Suddenly, I ripped his hand away. What if these children are not born perfect? I asked. We'll put them in good hands again. How can you and I talk about God? After all, maybe our girl grows up normal, pleasing her foster parents. We've been told that can't happen. You know what happens. Doctors make mistakes sometimes. And even if she's gone, we'll never know. It'll haunt me for the rest of my life. We didn't talk the rest of the way. I did give birth to a boy and a girl. I left my favorite dives. I didn't care about that anymore, except to the sea. We could sometimes get away with the kids, but the country was taking a turn for the worse. There was another crisis, and we bought a villa. If my husband thought that our twins are compensation received from fate for the child we lost, I thought that the new villa is compensation for the one that tormented me all my childhood and adolescence. Villa Mom was given when she was expecting me, and not just so on, and her friend who worked in the house, and repeated under a lying stone water does not flow. These plots of land knocked out Mom, and in the 8th month looked at a plot of clay, and in the road 10 minutes walk from her factory. And she cried. Really? Said the father. You know how we are here all arranged and became not only my parents, but all the factory workers. Happy owners of hell knows what, but their inch of land to build a garden city. My father built it in his own way. He said something very obscene on my tongue. For instance, he had a cellar in the cabin. You open the hatch and underneath is a square room 2 meters high. The empty one jumps out, and there is another hatch in the floor, and under it there is another such 2-meter square room, and again without a ladder. And there's potatoes, baths. I still don't know how my father got down there. Maybe he jumped down and pulled himself up on a rope with buckets in his teeth. But nothing's been stolen from us in a quarter of a century. Thieves opened the hatch first. They'd see it was empty, and they'd leave, disappointed. Once they could not contain their feelings and wrote on the wall of the cabin in big blue letters, "Goat." That's what we've been calling it ever since. Villa, villas, goat. But kind of like Pippi Longstocking had a chicken. And my dad also raised chickens. He'd buy chickens, spread a few bags of millet on the floor, put a pot of water on the floor, lock up the house and leave. He'd come back and they'd be all grown up. They wandered not in yellow down, but in white feathers. The chickens grew up quiet and without problems. Mom loved the villas to the point of madness. At one time, she chose the institute on the principle that would not leave the city. And in the city was one polytechnic, and my mom, instead of going to any university biofaculty or agricultural, became an engineer. And for more than 30 years, she settled down in the design office. And so after a full day in the red-hot reinforced concrete thighs, Mom would break out in the evening, crushed and goat. She could graft 25 new branches onto one apple tree. She was chewed out, even sticking her dry sagebrush into the ground. Although around the plot allocated for summer houses were solid chemical plants, not caterpillars. Not even the worms didn't survive. After the factory emissions, probably the vegetables and fruits that grew here weren't useful. And if they were tested, they'd be off the charts in terms of different chemical compounds. But my sister and I grew up on it. The harvests, against all odds, were spectacular. Just a sea of strawberries and raspberries, pears, apples. We never had a car, and we had to carry the harvest home ourselves. So when I remember summer, I'd always have a bucket of cherries in one hand and a bucket of currants in the other. And with all that weight, a long walk under the hot sun to the bus stop. And my sister with bags with all sorts of strong carrots. And in the summer, we always turned off elevators and hot water. So we had to carry the crops up to the 8th floor. And here you are, dirty, tired, angry. There's no warm water to wash yourself, and the crops still have to be processed. Such a quantity won't fit in the refrigerator. And without a refrigerator, it's lost. I remember my sister came in to make apple juice. I was juicing. It was bouncing and vibrating on the table. How much juice did you squeeze? It's bouncing and vibrating on the table. And everything's gingerly singing. And the walls and the ceiling, and my sister's all upside down. Even her glasses are splattered. And she curses in a way that would make the laborers rest. Where did that come from? And then my sister and I insisted and sold the villa. My sister hated it. I didn't like to work the land at that time either. A neighbor bought it to combine 2 plots. That's how much my mom's teeth cost at that time, which she had done in a private office. But the teeth were uncomfortable. They were more and more in the glass. And then our dog turned the glass upside down and ate the teeth. I didn't marry the children. In the summer, we now lived in a cottage where my little ones could run barefoot. It was good that they grew up alone. The neighbors had no children. But my daughter and son were not bored without peers. They had enough of each other, although the twins were born just 5 minutes apart. They were very different, Anna and Max. Anna, as they say, is a princess. She was always a terribly fidgety child, and to force her to sit still and do things quietly, I would pull out my wedding dress and put it on her. It seemed so unimaginably beautiful to Anna that she would freeze and be afraid to move. And she'd sit there for an hour or two. All so beautiful. She was not yet 2 years old when we went for a walk in the city center, and I took her to a wedding dress salon out of sheer wit. There was my dress on Flower Boulevard. Not the only one. My God, it was like a savage who had prayed for his crystal beads all his life, and suddenly found himself in a shop full of costume jewelry. Anna grabbed the 2 nearest dresses with a dead grip and howled, "Mine." We managed to take her away, only by promising that in another store dress even better. So my husband and I took her to several more stores, and only then lured her to the bus stop. And then she howled all the way home for the hour we drove. And for Christmas we gave her her own dress, an airy princess dress made of white netting with stars and turnovers. It was a delight. It can't be told and can't be described. The trouble started when it was time to take the dress off. She was only 2 years old at the time. Time to eat and bedtime. So do we shake Anna out of the dress? And from then on, until she grew out of that outfit. My daughter's greatest happiness was to dress up as a princess. Max is different, completely indifferent to clothes. It's hard to convince him to change from dirty to clean. His main hobby is animals, anything from a butterfly to an elephant. Of course, my son rarely sees elephants, only when we go to the zoo. And it all started with the fact that being very young, my son was sick. He lay quite sick and miserable and asked for a rabbit. In case you didn't know, the only way to have fun with a fever is a rabbit. When I got my paycheck, I went to get a rabbit. Hare at that time in the city had when I ran a few stores and only in the last saw this creature. In the cage sat a rabbit dwarf, small, white, the size of a rat. I bought it, brought it in. Max, of course, was in complete delight and was afraid to breathe on him. In the morning, everything was fine, but in the afternoon, the rabbit fell on its side and lay down. Only the whiskers move a little, and he snores a little audibly. We call the vet. They say bring, but it is clear that the hare to the hospital will not reach the hospital. Max is squatting nearby and wipes off his cheeks. Here's large fenced. I took the animal, put it in a box. Let it rest, I say. Really just did not know what to do. Half an hour later, I see Sat Bunny washed up, falling from weakness, went to the feeder to eat, and fell asleep, coming back to the saucer with the food in a ball like a kitten. Turns out he was stressed from the extra attention. Then, when I decided to go to the orphanage and find out something about my daughter, Christmas was approaching. I wasn't feeling very well. My head and shoulders ached. I guess all illnesses are a reflection of the way we live. I had too much on my shoulders, and I had a lot of heavy thoughts in my head. We hadn't bought a Christmas tree yet, and the kids were pestering me the day before, asking if I'd forget to bring the forest beauty in time. And on that day, our employee said that Christmas trees for journalists would be free of charge, and the national park had already allocated them. They were brought, and they are lying in the garage. You can take them. I'm off. I am glad that the epic of the previous year will not be repeated. We almost got screwed then. At first, there was a wild quantity of Christmas trees, and they were sold everywhere. The market was like a lumberyard. And then either it turned out that the trees were not quite legal, or the traders lost hope of selling the goods and left. But a few days before Christmas, there were no more trees, neither live nor artificial. And Anna and I stood in the middle of the market, looked at the dirty snow with vicious needles, and thought that all the first year without. And then, as in Soviet times, comes a woman and whispering asks you a Christmas tree together with us overestimated, still unfamiliar father and daughter. And in the dirty, empty barracks, they had 2 trees on the floor. One still looked like a Christmas tree, but the other had 2 branches, one at the top and one at the bottom. And we carried this fir tree with a stick. Then we sat down with it at the bus stop and called my husband, who had been sent to look for a Christmas tree in other parts of the city. We got one, only you meet us because we're not carrying it. We sat there and hid it behind our backs because we were embarrassed that it was so ugly. And everyone thought we were hiding it because we were greedy and didn't want to tell them where they sold them. It was the last Christmas tree in town. We took it as a basis because at the dacha we have a spruce, which my mother brought in a scarf from near Street Petersburg, from the Ship Grove. The fir tree has already grown taller than the house. We cut off a few branches from her and screwed to our freak. And now you can choose the trees of your choice. That's great. We don't have much room in the house. All the rooms are crammed with furniture. The only place we can put a tree is on the table. So I asked in advance that they get me the smallest tree they could find. I was passing by the bazaars. There were some tiny Christmas trees there, but I thought that Leshka would bring a Thumbelina. I'm going into the garage. Anyway, if I stand on a chair, I can reach the top of the lowest Christmas tree with my raised arm. Our male coworkers, they said they drank it. Executed before Christmas. So for some reason I felt bitter that I just waved my hand and went. I didn't know why I got on the bus and went to the orphanage. Of course, They wouldn't let me go any farther than the watch. After all, I had no prior arrangement with anyone. And passing by, the educator only threw that the secret of adoption is protected by the state. And I will never know what kind of family took my child in, and then a miracle happened. Anyway, I can't interpret it any other way. The old nanny who was mopping the floor left her mop and looked at me. Are you that stupid girl who swam out of before she abandoned the baby? Aya, do you remember me, even though I'm an old woman with a bad memory? I can tell you the truth, but I don't want you to run around in my generation. What are you talking about? I don't get it. Well, you won't complain to all the authorities that they cheated you for no reason that our bosses are in trouble. What about my girl? I got cold feet. I was cheated. She's dead. Your daughter is alive. The nanny squeezed the rag and wound it around the mop again. She's grown up all right. Not even sick at all. Only nobody took her in and adopted her. She grew up in these walls. She finished school and moved away. Where to? I guess I couldn't control my voice at that moment, because the woman on watch looked back at us. I don't know about that. You didn't give her a name, did you? If you gave up on her right away, why are you crying? It's too late now. Her name is Lily. Maybe she's married now. I was already crying. I would have come to my senses. I would have taken her. That's why the nurse said that different moms come here and make scandals. And our teachers have been beaten up. That's why we try to say that their children are no longer here. How am I gonna find her now? And here's a clue, she had a boy. And once they ran away from the orphanage together to a tattoo parlor, they beat a dragon and rose on her shoulder. They'd fought a lot, then the teachers. But she didn't remove the tattoo and probably wears it today. It's a hard life here, Mama. In winter, we barely managed to get the boiler room repaired. There was a glacier in the bedrooms, and our headmistress doesn't catch mice. The kids complain that they're cold, and she said get a second blanket. At home, I did not answer the questions of my husband's children. I lay down and turned my face to the wall. I could not imagine what my girl had become, because I had hardly seen her. For some reason, I remembered my own youth. It was cold in our dormitory at the university, too. In my first year, in September, I lived alone in our local room. The students were sent to work on the collective farm, and we were left to clean the classrooms and the dean's office. I remember evenings when, having collected from all 5 beds green and blankets with crimson stripes around the edges, I folded under them with my teeth and warmed my hands over the electric stove. The stove was illegal. Cooking was supposed to be done on the only 3-burner electric stove on the floor. Only one of the burners could bring food to a boil. And you could not turn away, move away, go to get onions, salt. Everything was stolen from the pot. A piece of chicken, half a raw potato, so half a raw potato. Yesterday's applicants, we were still children. We had to get used to the fact that for potatoes we had to go to the market, to the other end of the city, and we would not see milk at all. Because bottled milk in stores is bought up in 2 hours, and bottled in the evenings you can get only in the outskirts of the stores. And if someone from the dormitory wanted to make mashed potatoes and began to sip potatoes, he was snidely asked if you have milk. Usually the potatoes were just mashed with water and butter. What we ate then? In the morning we thinly sliced onions and poured mayonnaise on them and put them on a piece of bread. In the evenings we cooked chicken soup and occasionally from the scholarship allowed ourselves to go into dumplings. It's expensive, variable, but it's still crowded because the dumplings are delicious. We stand at the tail end. The lines are long. From time to time, the cook comes over to them, and we see what they hold in their hands. If it's mitten-sized, we hang it up. The line sighs disappointedly. If it's a colander, it's a sit-down. And those who are first in line now will get their portions. And me and my girlfriend will be at a table in a dark corner. You pour in your plate on the smoking dumplings. Half a cup of sour cream each to keep you satiated for a long time. My girl in kindergarten must have lived on hunger too. Then I remembered the library where I spent a lot of time during my school years. It occupied one wing of the opera and ballet theater building, and in the other wing there was a choreographic school. The girls and boys there also lived in boarding school. I imagined how in the evenings these girls ran on the floor of dark staircases, tangled in down and shawl, because it's cold here. I saw it all as if it were his. Their shapely legs in point shoes, and their hair tightly tied at the back of their heads, and I could hear what they were saying in the bedrooms. And soon they'll be dancing the Nutcracker because Christmas is coming. What can we get ourselves for Christmas? There's no makeup in the stores. I mean, they sell mascara. It's a block of black stuff as hard as granite that you have to thaw out before you can put on makeup. It's not like now, when everyone's excited about you and you're excited about the furniture. From the gypsies who occasionally sweep with their skirts near the stores, you can get polished shadows or lipstick, even in the bluest and lilac colors. Under the dead man, we buy perfume. They were magic at that time. You could perfume a sweater and then wash it dry. And there was still a faint odor. How much was there? Watercolors, with a lower odor, or Romeo and Juliet in Riga. 2. Boxed bottles on white silk. Juliet smells like jasmine. Just before the holiday, everyone in the group drops 50 cents each and raffles off a bottle of champagne that someone has gotten, because there is no champagne in the stores either. I remember taking my children to the theater, and what a celebration it was for them. We saw Silva. We were sitting in the front row. One of the characters dropped a champagne glass, and it shattered. And then the dancers come out. If they were wearing shoes. No, point shoes. The stage is tiny, and the dancers have to waltz right into the shards. At the very last moment, one of the artists leaned over, and in one movement, all this glass with a comb in the palm of his hand. And then Boney M. They got into a fight, and Boney screamed. Careful, he has a new disease shaking. Max whispers to Mom, what 3 bitches he's got, where it's shorter. I covered my face and sobbing. The librarian looks on with laughter. And then Silva swung his black bow over us and feathers flew on our heads. That's the kind of theater lovers we were. I could never agree with those people who think that time flows slowly. For me, it was always galloping. I think I just took my kids to first grade. Here we are with parents standing under the office door and waiting to pick up our kids. We won't notice how 11 years will fly by, one of the moms said then. I didn't believe her, but she was right. Before we knew it, it was graduation night. And if with Max everything was solved, he just didn't care in what suit to go to the ball, then with Anna we chose different options for so long. In the end, we had 2 dresses for the ceremonial part of the blue puffy. Puffy daughter looked like a queen in this dress. And we also bought a small black dress, which was comfortable to dance at the disco. Anna said right away that she would go to New York. Max chose the law school in our city. I realized that my daughter and son's childhood was over. The chicks are leaving the nest, and that's the way it should be. But before we parted, I warned the children that we had an important conversation to have. I didn't inform my husband that I was going to tell Anna and Max. He'd long since given up on our first child, blurred it out of his memory. To him, it was just some unpleasant incident that happened in such and such a year. But I knew I'd be tormented for the rest of my life by the fact that I'd given up my child. So I honestly told my kids that they had an older sister. Except we'll probably never find her. I can't even tell you what she looks like, I said with infinite sadness. The only time I ever saw her, her hair was dark and her eyes were blue. But then she was a newborn baby, and who knows what she's like now? The only thing more or less accurate. On her shoulder, she has a tattoo of a dragon holding a rose in its mouth. Anna was amazed. Mom, but how did you decide to give up a child like that? Max and I were sick as children too, and you nursed us back to health. You cared for each one of us. It never occurred to you to get rid of us. That word, get rid of us, stabbed me. And didn't Daddy object? The daughter went on. Did he have to convince you that everything was manageable? It's all treatable now. Your dad, I asked bitterly. He made me do it, actually. I've been told from all sides that it's hard. A sick child. What was I supposed to give birth to? According to the doctors, would put an end to our family. We would never be able to live a normal life again. Everyone said the right and reasonable thing. But I almost immediately began to regret my decision. But it was too late to fix anything. I had been lied to and told that my little girl had been adopted. And it turns out that this did not happen. and she grew up in the cold, stuffy walls of the orphanage. I bet she wasn't fed and abused. She suffered because she wasn't wanted. The people closest to her have given up on her. Anna finally realized how hard it was for me to say all this. She ran over and hugged me. "It's okay," she said. "Fate will still be on our side. We'll find Lily, I'm sure. If I graduated from law school, I'll have a better chance of finding out about her," Max encouraged. All I could do was cover my face with my hands and cry. Anna went to New York, enrolled in college. Soon enough, she got married. Her husband has his own slot machine business. Once a year, I go to visit her. She has a big apartment in the new district. The house has a gated courtyard where they don't let outsiders in. And in the apartment, in addition to the rooms, there is even a place for a small pond and a mini pool where the turtles swim. And Anna herself now looks stylish, wears expensive things, building a career. I realize that she will never return to our city, and that if I live to old age, I can hardly count on her as an assistant who will take care of me. I'm happy for my daughter, she's doing well, and my son-in-law and I have a great relationship. But essentially, I've lost Anna. She's slowly becoming more and more of a stranger with her own agenda and interests. Well, that's life, and I'm okay with that. Max graduated from law school and joined the police force, but it wasn't an easy road. There were always conflicts with his superiors. In our small provincial town, connections and money decide everything. After a couple of cases, Max quit. 2 cars collided at the intersection, one of them from tossed, so that she crashed into the concrete porch of the store. The elderly driver died on the spot when they began to reconstruct the picture of what had happened from the CCTV cameras. It became clear who was responsible for the accident. The son of the deputy of the local Duma flew his car at a huge, unacceptable speed for the city and did not think to slow it down even at the intersection, so he rammed into an old 8. But it was the dead driver who was found guilty of the accident. Allegedly, he should have given way. The young son of a wealthy family paid for the funeral. That's how he got off. The second case was about the same. Drunken officials on a motorboat went for a walk on one of the islands and managed to crash into an inflatable boat with a whole family in it, a father and mother and a child. The head of the family was injured, fell overboard, and his body was not found until several days later. The officials got away with it. The motor driver received a suspended sentence, and again the dead man was found guilty. Allegedly, he'd been drinking and failed to yield the right of way. "Can't be an investigator anymore," Max said afterward. "I'm doing my own research. I know who is to blame in this or that case. And the blame falls on completely different people. That's enough. I quit. And my son went to work as a security guard in a store, even though it didn't pay much. And the profession of security guard became, to put it mildly, not prestigious. Max still hasn't gotten married, even though my girlfriends tried to match him with their daughters. And I don't insist that my son rush to have a family. Let it happen in its own time. And I divorced my husband. I just couldn't take it anymore. The loneliness of being alone together. We had completely lost understanding of each other, and what filled my soul with bitterness did not touch him at all. At the registry office, we were persuaded to delay our decision. You've lived together for so many years. Do you really want to be alone now, when old age is already staring you in the face? Your children will have their own lives anyway. Would you be able to support each other? We heard you, but I insisted on a divorce. We split the apartment, got a 2-bedroom for our 3 and little family. The son took his father's side. They were always close. And now I have my own corner in the former dormitory. A 10-square-meter room with a tiny hallway. On one side of the bathroom, on the other, a kind of kitchen, a cubbyhole, which can hardly fit one person. But the center of the city opposite the stores, next to the park and the second floor. I'm getting ready for old age. I won't have to climb stairs if the elevator goes out, or walk far for bread and kefir. I've resigned myself to the fact that I'll live out my life alone. Suddenly, Max called me and almost shouted into the phone, "Mommy, she's found." The girl with the dragon and the rose. Lily sat idly in the back room. She was sure that nothing good would come of her attempt to sneak a few nuts in the store. Most likely, the guard would call the police and she would be fined something. Her name will be on the police report. Sooner or later, Herbert will find her, and when he does, he'll force her back into his house and beat her half to death, and a restraining order. The guard didn't say another word. He stood in the doorway of the back room and was definitely afraid Lily would get in somewhere. Sometimes female voices called out to him, but he just waved them away. And half an hour later, a middle-aged woman came into the little room. She was very pale and looked at Lily with her eyes, a shaken person. The last thing she looked like was an angry shopkeeper, and Lily didn't know what to think. "What's your name?" asked the woman. Lily gave her first and last name. After all, there was no point in hiding them. The woman flinched slightly. "Are you married?" Lily wanted to answer was, but the woman did not wait for those words. "You had a different maiden name." Hurriedly she asked, and when Lily named her, the stranger covered her eyes. "Did you grow up in an orphanage?" she said in a tone of assertion. "How do you know?" Lily wondered. "We need to talk. Max, please see that no one enters this room." The woman sat down on the chair the guard had placed for her. She was quiet for a few minutes. "I don't know where to start," she admitted. "We could do a test. I guess that's what it's gonna take, but I'm pretty sure I'm your birth mother. You may never forgive me. I can already see that life hasn't spoiled you, but you me. If you're not hard right, you'll regret it if you don't do everything you could have expected, Lily." But not what happened to her. The guard didn't send her to the police station. Instead, a woman sat across from her and begged her to listen. "Speak up," Lily said. The woman started from afar. She talked about how she had married without much love, how she had gotten caught up in the routine of everyday life when she was still young and wanted a thrill, how she got into extreme sports and achieved something. And then the records were a time of pregnancy, and the doctors assumed that the child is terminally ill. "I waited many years," the woman said. "If it is impossible to correct the mistake, then at least to find you and apologize. My husband and I committed a betrayal, and we betrayed a defenseless child, so it is impossible to justify us. Then we had normal, healthy children. We raised them. Max, your brother, Anna is married and lives in New York. My husband and I recently separated. What he and I did was forever between us. So now I'm alone. And if there's anything I can do for you." Lily was silent. She was confused and didn't know what to say. "Your life has been very difficult." The woman still kept her eyes from her or shrugged her shoulders. "But of course, there is not much fun in an orphanage, although children can find something good in any environment. Don't be so hard on yourself. As you can see, I grew up in spite of everything, got an education. I was even on my own 2 feet for a while. And the fact that things have fallen apart in my life now, it's not your fault. Maybe I don't have the right to ask." The woman looked at Lily from head to toe for the 100th time. "But you have a place to live." "I don't right now," Lily answered bluntly. "But I hope it's only temporary and everything will eventually fall into place." "Come with me," said the one who called herself her mother. "My apartment is more than modest, of course, but at least I have a roof over my head. We have much to tell each other. You, Max, on the other hand, I would ask you not to say anything to your father. It's been over for him for years, and he doesn't need to know." That night, Lily and her mother couldn't sleep for a long time. Her mother had fed the girl enough, laid out a cot for her, and put fresh linen on it. But they talked and talked even though the hands of the clock ran far past midnight. Lily told about her years of life in the orphanage, about her friends, about her teachers, evil and kind, about how she had become a landscape designer to create beauty with her own hands. Her mother touched her hand. "I have a villa. It's yours now." "Thank you," Lily whispered. About Herbert, she told briefly it was too painful to remember. But she confessed that she was afraid he would find her. "You have a brother now. He'll be able to protect you." "Well, I don't know," Lily said incredulously. "I don't want to have to protect you from my ex-husband. He's got a lot of power and a lot of money." The next day at the family council, they decided that Lily would go to the villa and live there a little rest, come to her senses, and then it would be clear. Although the mother no longer doubted that she had found her daughter, she still once again traveled this way and visited the children's home and in the orphanage where Lily grew up. She went there with pictures of the girl. And now, when it was no longer about the interests of a minor girl, the educators were more cooperative. It turned out that this is the same little girl, which parents abandoned immediately after her birth. The situation was finally clarified by a DNA test. Lilia was recovering quickly. The bruises her ex-husband had left on her memory came together. In the hospital, they removed the plaster from her broken arm. The girl enjoyed gardening, planting flowers, caring for plants, noticing how the small garden was transformed under her hands. Neighbors began to ask her for help. Lily believed that even here, in a foreign city, she would be able to do what she loved and get back on her feet. Herbert finally picked up her trail and appeared in the city. But Max, using his old police connections, managed to get a hold of him. "If I ever see you near your sister again, I'll have Sasha for a long time," he promised. "You weren't shy about raising your hand to Lily, and we're not shy. You'll probably be found in possession of drugs. And that's a lot of time." And Mom got a call from the doctor she was hopelessly in love with. Kelly said, "Let's meet you somewhere. I've been wanting to talk to you for a long time." Kelly couldn't invite him to her tiny room. There was no place to sit. They set up a meeting at a cafe in the park near Kelly's house. It was a rainy and cold day, and it suited the woman's mood. Until now, her rare encounters with Ethan had been like a drug of happiness and hope at first. And then he'd be gone for months, if not years. And that was how it was now. The last time they'd seen each other was several years ago. Kelly knew she had grown old, but she accepted her age with dignity. Didn't get along unnecessarily, which made quite a few older women ridiculous. Kelly always dressed tastefully. She didn't own many things, but they all suited her. A good haircut, a light scarf around her neck, a light-colored coat. But most importantly, her gaze had changed. It didn't have that tragic note that you always have. "Something good?" Ethan asked. Kelly smiled slightly. "It's a long story, but you called me here for a reason, so there was a reason." "Let's start with you. I just wanted to see you." Ethan shrugged. "Somehow I ended up alone." "But you've been alone before." Kelly wondered. "As far as I know, your parents live in another city with your brother." "That's right. But I guess when you're young, you don't feel loneliness too much. On the contrary, you even want to be at work all day. Everyone needs you there. In the evening, you think about one thing: to come and collapse in bed, and no one to disturb you until morning. But time goes by and things change. I'm almost out of surgery now. Hospital entry is as bad as conspiracy in the royal household. And my eyesight is failing. It's time for eye surgery, so that's the end of my youthful enthusiasm. Now I come home after a day's work like everyone else. And there are nights when I don't feel like going home. I know I'll be greeted by dark apartment windows. I've had a lot of patients, but you're the only one who's ever asked me about me. Everyone else was only interested in me as a doctor. They started telling me about their illnesses, complaining, asking for advice, asking for things. And now I think that no one ever needed me as a person." Ethan stared straight ahead. Kelly was silent. It was no use telling him that she'd loved him for years, unrequitedly. And he hadn't noticed. Would it make any difference now? "And you," he continued, "tell me about yourself. Before your eyes were always sad. Now they're bright. Something good has happened. It's a story that sounds like a fairy tale." And Kelly told him what she'd never told him before, how she'd lost her daughter, and now she found her again. And she didn't care what her old friend thought of her now. Ethan was shaken. I can imagine the burden she'd lived with for so many years. "How's Lily doing now?" "She's fine. If you need my help." No, she's almost recovered, and now she wants to get back on her feet. I signed the house over to her, and she's making a real piece of paradise out of it. She knows that I would do anything for her, that I'm deeply remorseful and guilty. But I have to give her time, and for now I'm not imposing. She has to see for herself if she can accept me as her mother. You are a wise man. Ethan touched Kelly's arm, and you can forgive me. And she returned the chin. For what? Well, I'm a complete fool. I've noticed things. But at the time, I valued my freedom more than anything. And now I'd like to make up for it, if it's not too late. 2 months later, Kelly and Ethan's modest wedding was celebrated at the old country house. There was a wonderful starfall that night, and everyone could make a wish and believe it would come true. Lily grew up in an orphanage. She never questioned who her real parents were, because she'd seen all the other kids. Lily didn't remember her father and mother. She felt like she'd been in the orphanage forever. She was even born here. But a lot of the other kids had it rough. Some of them, living at home, suffered beatings and reproaches. Some of them starved. Some of them saw the hard scenes when alcoholic or drug-addicted parents were not ashamed to lead a habitual lifestyle in front of their children. There were boys and girls who entered the orphanage. The real Mowgli didn't know how to use cutlery, didn't know how to make a bed behind them. Lily looked down on them. She was by nature very often dense, pleased in appearance too. The girl grew pretty like a doll, face as if porcelain, thin dark eyebrows, long eyelashes, bobbing hair. The teachers and nannies loved Lily, and she did not trouble them at all. They often brought her clothes, some skirts and blouses, bows left by their daughters for the shelves. And Lily was dressed smartly of all her peers. The teachers sincerely wanted to bring Lily into the family and wondered why nobody had taken her so far. After all, as they say, this is a gift version of the child. But potential parents rarely visited them. They preferred to take very young children, no older than 3 years. That's what the old nanny Adriana said. A kid like that is still a mystery. You don't know what he'll grow up to be. And if the kids are older, you can see their nature right away. That same nanny shed some light on Lily's origins. Your mother should have never taken you in, she said. Lily girl at that time was already 12 years old, and she understood a lot. Lily, who had heard something about her relatives for the first time, was surprised. Do you know anything about my mom? Good woman, decent. Yeah, the doctors scared her back in the day. She was into some kind of extreme sports. Well, they said it had something to do with it. Concluded that the baby would be born with a defect. The baby was already far along, about to go into labor, and I understood that her husband forbade her to take you out of the hospital. Her husband had a son in his second marriage, and he told his wife that we had enough of one child. We'll raise my boy, put him on his feet, and that's enough. How do you know that? Your mother came here when you were just transferred from the orphanage. She wanted to know if her daughter was okay. That's when we had that one conversation. And then our supervisor decided that your mother would come here regularly. She didn't like that. Parents are different. Some come in drunk. Some of them are so out of control, you could call the police. So she told me to say that you were adopted, and the state protects the secrecy of adoption. So we won't give you any information. And the truth is, you've been living here just as you are. That's a cruel thing to say, Lily. She wasn't planning on taking you anyway. It's your mother, sighed the nanny. You were really troubled at first, that heart murmur. The doctor would find a heart murmur, then a developmental delay. Then you threw yourself out, and you became the smartest, the prettiest. Since the day Nanny Adriana told the girl the secret, did something change in her? It was as if she'd become bitter at the orphanage and stopped being a role model. The caregivers attributed it to the transitional age and the fact that Lily had fallen in love with David, the bully 9th grader. The last name David. Everyone laughed at it as a kid. Maybe that's what shaped the kid's drive, to use his fists at every turn. He had a crush on Lily too, so he got her a present. They sneak off to the tattoo parlor together. David had a knight with a sword on his arms, and Lily had a dragon holding a rose on her shoulder. At night her shoulder ached and she couldn't sleep. Lily went to cry to the nurse Adriana, who was on duty just then. What could she have done to help? Helped a nail with oil on it, and scolded the girl. You're smart enough. You're not some girl from jail to wear a tattoo. You're gonna get tattooed head to toe. Okay, David, he's a guy, and you're gonna be getting those tattoos. Mark my words. Lily thought she loved David too much to refuse his gift. Either way, the dragon would remain as a memento of her first love. And so it was. Soon Lily was unexpectedly adopted. It happened almost against the girl's will. An elderly woman came to the orphanage unexpectedly and told her that her daughter had grown up, left to study, and would not return to her home. And it is painfully dreary to be alone. so she wants to take an older girl so that her adopted daughter would become her helper and companion. Caregiver immediately saw in this chance for their favorite Lily and began to persuade Aunt Clara to take her. You won't find a better girl. Hardworking, responsible, a real star. Aunt Clara didn't mind, but Lily did. She'd have to leave the orphanage, to part with David without the possibility of seeing her again in the near future. It took a lot of effort to persuade her. Subsequently, Lily had to regret her decision. Aunt Clara took her to the village to a small dark house on the outskirts. She had to learn to do all the housework, even to stow the stove. And the woman had a large vegetable garden, and from spring to fall, she had to literally work there, digging, planting, weeding, helping, processing the harvest. Now Lily no longer resembled a doll. She was badly burned, arms cupped and kneaded. Aunt Clara dressed her poorly. Allowing any money for cosmetics was out of the question. Even the food was Lily compared to the orphanage very meager. Today Aunt Clara cooked soup for the whole day. Tomorrow, again, she fried pancakes or baked pies for the whole day. Lily hoped that at least at school, she would be able to eat with her classmates in the school cafeteria. But no, the meal fee Aunt Clara thought was too much. So instead, she wrapped her foster daughters up with her. Still the same piece of cake, but the first time Lily really got up in arms was when she graduated from high school. Why would you want to go anywhere? Aunt Clara said firmly. I put so much effort into you, and now you're going to leave me. Girls don't need that science. You'll get married anyway. You'll have kids and then you'll abandon everything. Why don't you go be a saleswoman? There's a store near your house, 2 minutes away, and you'll get your paycheck right away. And the saleswoman lets you take home expired goods. These products will be very useful to us. Lily knew from bitter experience that it was useless to argue with her foster mother. The girl thanked fate that she had saved money in advance. She worked part-time, hiding it from Aunt Clava to walk and other people's dogs. And she even tutored children from junior high school. Lily found out the bus schedule in advance, left home at dawn, taking with her a minimum of things, her documents and saved money, and left for the regional center. She had already turned 18, and even if Aunt Clara tries to look for her, she has no rights to return Lily. A few nights the girl slept at the train station as well. She didn't care what school to enter, as long as she got some specialty. And in the meantime to get a dormitory. Coming to the first college in the admissions office, Lily was confused. Fortunately, one of the teachers was a kind soul who talked to the girl, asked her what she could do, what she would like to do, and having heard that Lily likes to grow flowers, advised her to apply for landscape design. Unexpectedly, this choice turned out to be, as they say, an accurate shot on target. And Lily began to learn easily and with passion. Domestic problems were also solved. The college had a good hostel. Lily was put in a cozy room for 3. The roommates were good, companionable, and the girl herself did not notice how the years of study flashed by. When Lily got her diploma, she thought that she would have to work harder than the others. The other girls returned home to their parents. Some of them had gotten married in the meantime. Lily had to think about where to live and where to get the money to pay the rent. Fortunately, quite quickly she found her first clients, and soon with the help of word of mouth. Orders she began to have a lot. Now the girl could rent a modest apartment and buy herself everything she needed. Of course, the labor was not easy and mostly seasonal. In summer, Lily was busy from dawn to dusk. It was good if the customer was attentive and inviting the girl to work, would think about where she could drink tea, have a snack in the middle of the day, and wash in the evening. But many times Lily came home dead tired, dirty, and hungry. It was surprising that she had met Herbert in such an unrepresentable state. Lily was building a slide at a country house. She'd been working on it all day. She didn't think about how she was going to get home until 8 o'clock in the evening. People in this neighborhood were wealthy, they all had cars, and there was no public transportation. Lily was about to call a cab when a car pulled up beside her, and a man at least 10 years older than her offered her a ride. Lily was dense, dirty, and very uncomfortable getting into a shiny car like that. But the man didn't seem to be embarrassed by that at all. All the way they talked casually, and when they said goodbye, Herbert asked Lily to meet again. He courted her as if she were the only woman on earth, and very quickly he proposed to Lily. "I'm sure I've met the one I've been looking for all my life," he said. So why stall for time waiting for something? Before the wedding, Lily no, and remembered David, the one she loved the most in the world. The new feeling couldn't be compared to the old one. But David was rumored to be living somewhere else in the city. He was working as a mechanic and slowly drinking himself to death. But most importantly, he wasn't looking for Lily, which meant he'd fallen out of love, so she could marry without remorse. But very quickly, after marriage, Lily realized she was in a mess. Yes, she now lived in a big, beautiful house and had enough money for everything: new outfits, her own car, traveling, not to mention good food, which meant a lot to Lily too. But Herbert turned out to be such a jealous and hot-tempered man that life with him became an agony. Lily was not only forced to quit her job, she found herself practically trapped within four walls. Before, the house had been guarded by a tall, clean-cut guy from a private security company. When Lily arrived, he was immediately replaced by an older, balding man in his 60s. There were security cameras in the house. There were surveillance cameras in the house, and soon Lily didn't dare to open the door to the mailman, or the pizza delivery guy, or anyone. And what good was it if she had her own car? She couldn't drive anywhere. If Herbert wasn't sitting next to her, another woman and in another situation immediately filed for divorce. But after Herbert had beaten Lily badly several times, he hinted that she would not have time to get help from anyone. He would just kill her. Maybe it was just a threat, but Lily believed it. She was so afraid of her husband now that as soon as he arched his eyebrows, her voice was taken away from her, and her hands began to tremble finally. He had no problem slapping her or pushing her, so that she flew to the opposite corner of the room. Lily always bruised very easily, and now she walked like a piano player at home. She had to wear clothes that covered not only her body, but also her arms and legs in the summer. Of course, with this way of life, Lily had no girlfriends, and after a few years she turned into a socially unadapted creature.